Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining me on this webinar this evening. My name is Garrett McLaughlin. Tonight, we will cover Cadence, how to manipulate your step rate to reduce pain and improve performance. Again, super excited about this topic. Something I can really work on with my runners on a daily basis. That really helps provide a lot of good results in terms of again, recovering from injury or also improving performance. And we'll dive into that a little bit more here in a second. Before we get started, do me a favor and locate the Q&A function somewhere on your screen, depending on whether you're viewing this webinar from a cell phone or a computer. You should see a Q&A button. If at any point throughout the webinar you have a question, feel free to add it in that Q&A button there for me. At the very end of the webinar, I will be entering names into the raffle to win 1 free month in the Healthy Running Program. This includes your running analysis, running retraining, strength training, and injury prevention program, and the opportunity for us to work for 1 month for free of charge for that raffle winner to hopefully impact you in some way based on your goals and needs. If you by chance cannot stay for the webinar for whatever reason, I completely understand, but I will be sending the webinar replay tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So make sure you're checking your email and especially the spam folder, since it oftentimes ends up in there. Okay, so what to expect from this webinar today? We're going to start off kind of digging into the research behind Cadence. For those of you that are new to me, I like to understand what the research says on a bunch of these topics rather than going off my opinion. We need to really, I think, do a better job with understanding the research and letting it guide our decision-making process. So we're going to talk about that as it relates to pain, running economy, and performance. And then we're going to go into the methods to calculate your cadence. So I know a lot of people are unfamiliar. Cadence might be new to you, or if it isn't and it's something you've heard of before, maybe you have not calculated it yourself. So we're going to talk about a few different ways to do that, and then go into a series of tips and drills to properly manipulate your cadence. So how are we going to put this into action to actually see it carry over to our running? Before we get started, let me take a second, introduce myself. My name is Garrett McLaughlin. I'm a licensed athletic trainer and strength conditioning coach, currently in West Bloomfield, Michigan. I run what's called the Healthy Running Program. This program is, again, for runners regardless of location, especially after this past year. Again, need to find a way to be creative, to work with people regardless of location with all the shutdowns and things that happened, especially up here through the Midwest. So with the Healthy Running Program, again, regardless of your goals, being a runner, whether you want to get faster, move better, reduce your likelihood of injury, or recover for some type of overuse running related injury, we really work on dealing with all of those. We have a variety of runners going through the program right now with different goals and needs. So if there's anything you need moving forward, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask. Now, for me, cadence over the years was this missing link, right? We did things like orthopedic evaluations for runners dealing with pain, movement assessments, created strength training and injury prevention programs based on those assessments and those evaluations. But there was this disconnect when it came to really laying out the most effective program possible, because I really wasn't doing a great job looking at running form specifically early on, looking at like 6 to 8 years ago. After a certain point, I started to realize, regardless of what I give a runner in terms of a rehab exercise, in terms of a strength training exercise, the chance of getting injured is very likely unless we're looking at running specifically. So I started to really dig into the research, and there was just so much when it comes to cadence, its effectiveness on reducing pain, increasing or improving running economy, and then overall just allowing runners to run in a more efficient and effective way from a mechanics standpoint. So once I started adding a more thorough running analysis into my regimen, and now I'm at the point where regardless of whether a runner is seeing me to get stronger and improve performance, or they're currently suffering from a running related injury, we look at running form regardless of the situation. It's a must, and we make sure we don't overlook that in any way. Just because if we want their program to effectively carry over to their running, we need to impact running form in some way. And cadence has been one of those things that has been so impactful. Something as simple as, hey, your cadence is 160. We see you're overstriding. you're crossing over, your foot is over pronating, you're losing stability here. Increasing cadence can impact all of those things. And it's as simple as saying, here, you run at 160 steps per minute. We need to bump that up to 168 to impact running form in some way. And then we continue to check that to monitor to see, okay, how is that impacting running form? But cadence for me over the years has been this missing link that now over the last 6 years specifically has made a huge impact in the results that my running clients have seen. Now, if you're wondering what is cadence, if cadence is possibly new to you, cadence is, it very simply put, is the number of steps you take per minute. So whether that's walking, running, sprinting, doesn't matter, right? It's the number of steps you're taking within that minute. Throughout the webinar today, you might hear me refer to cadence as step rate or step frequency, depending on if I'm citing a research article or sometimes I use these interchangeably. Cadence, step rate, and step frequency all mean the same thing, which is the number of steps you take per minute. Now, based on some research over the years, and back in 2005 specifically, Daniels came out with an article where he was studying elite marathon runners. And what they found was during that marathon event, the majority of runners, again, their average cadence was between 170 and 180 steps per minute. Why does that matter? Is because we've taken this and I think run with it too far. You'll see a lot of different programs out there, good form running clinics, different things offered at running stores and different physical therapy clinics and such that they recommend here, you should increase your cadence to 180 steps per minute. Again, based on this research and the average for these runners, again, it's a reasonable and understandable metric to aim for there, 180. Unfortunately, if you are and at 150, increasing 30 steps per minute, it's a bit drastic. So we need to make sure when it comes to cadence, there's no one size fits all formula. We can't put everyone at the same metric and assume it's going to work for them. It needs to be individualized, and that's based on a running analysis, the goals, your goals specifically when it comes to running, and what your mechanics look like as you run. I have some people that run at 150 steps per minute that they land in the right position, they're stable, they're solid. We don't need to increase cadence in any way. I have other people that have a higher cadence and we're still working on getting that up a little bit more or changing mechanics in some way just because they're breaking down at some point with their running. Lieberman et al. In 2014 came out with a study showing the majority of recreational runners range from 156 to 170 steps per minute. And this is typically what I see. So that's the typical recreational runner. So there's this range, right? Anywhere from 156 to 180 we're seeing. And I see some people that fall slightly below, some people that are well above 200, 205 or so. It really depends on the runner, their limitations, their injury history, their goals. So making sure you just understand it's very individualized and it should be to your situation. So do me a favor here, take a second and click that Q&A button. There you'll be able to see a way for you to input a message directly to me. I'm curious here, what is your cadence? Is this something you've looked into before? Do you have a Garmin and you track it? Have you been somewhere for a running analysis, or do you just overall just know what your cadence is? If you do, write that in there and let me know what it is. If you don't, let me know that you don't. Okay, I'm kind of curious of how well people understand what their cadence is currently, because I think that'll be good to know here on the front end before we get further into the content. All right, let's take a look here what we see. All right, so we see a range of different cadences. So anywhere from 140, 145, 163, 180. Vaughn says 160-ish. Depends on speed. That's an important thing to understand too. Cadence is going to change based on your speed and your pace. Typically, the slower you run, the slower the legs are going to turn over. The faster you run, the faster the legs are going to turn over. At a certain point, when we look at cadence, we want to look at cadence at a variety of speeds to make sure mechanics are optimal at that speed. So that's important to know. 173, 167, 188. Awesome. All right, thanks, guys. Yeah, thanks for taking the time to input that in there. And let's move on here. Now, when we look at some of the research behind cadence, a couple different areas that have been researched pretty extensively, how cadence affects running mechanics, how cadence affects running economy, and then injuries specifically. So how much are we loading specific tissues of the body, especially when it comes to running related injuries, which are typically most often from the knee down, right? That's where you see the majority of running related injuries. Now, When it comes to running mechanics, we're going to look at a few key areas here. We're not going to look at everything, and there's too many things to look at when it comes to running form. So I'm going to try to narrow this down for you to see the most common things that I see during running analysis that typically break down with runners that cadence can positively impact. So first and foremost here, we have stride length and overstriding. This is a situation where I will always try to recommend an increase in cadence unless we can adopt other strategies like increasing trunk lean, or we want to improve it by working on some kind of marching drills. But we want to make sure the foot's not landing too far in front of the body, because that's a lot of extra load up the lower extremity that acts as more of a braking impulse. Next up, vertical oscillation. This is that bounciness as you run. Obviously, running is a very horizontal sport. You're trying to move from point A to point B. We want to limit that vertical excursion and going up and down. And then lastly, both of these together are braking impulses. The more we go up and down, the more that foot lands out in front of the body, the more it slows down our horizontal momentum, right? And then the last thing is step width. So depending on, again, could be your weaknesses as a runner, your running style. We see some people that are actually crossing over, almost like they're running on a line. They're kind of crossing to this midline of the body as opposed to the feet landing in equal position side to side. And we're going to look at some videos of these in a second so you can better understand them. So when it comes to stride length and overstriding, I'm going to let this video play here so you can see this runner. Again, a little slower on the cadence. You can see kind of slow turnover of the legs, but look where her foot is landing. We see she's striking right there through the heel, which I wouldn't necessarily worry heel strike, midfoot, forefoot strike, doesn't matter here. We're looking specifically where that foot is landing in relation to the body's center of mass. So she's landing quite a bit out front. Her leg is fairly extended. Her ankle is flexed. And you can see as I draw a line through there, that foot is clearly in front of that line, right? This is overstriding. So we want to stay out of that position as much as possible. We want the foot to land more so underneath the knee, because that will allow the body to more consistently drive forward without, almost like you're pushing on the gas pedal, right? That foot is extending out in front of you, so you're slowing down or you're stopping your horizontal momentum. This is something that increases a lot of load into the knee joint, but is a very inefficient way to run. Majority of runners that I see in the first running analysis, this is one of the most common things that I'll pick up on, is that foot's landing too far out in front. And we want to try to improve that in some way, because we can just, again, reduce the likelihood of injury, knee injury specifically, or just overall improve the efficiency and the mechanics as they run. Now, next one here, looking at vertical oscillation or vertical displacement. You can look at this runner here and just watch him already as he runs, very bouncy, right? If I draw a line on the top of his head, right, straight through the top of his head, and then we look at him at his lowest point versus his highest point, look how much he's translating up vertically, right? He's spending a lot of time propelling the body into the air rather than moving horizontally from point A to point B. If you think of just how gravity acts on the body, the higher you come up, the more gravity and force, body weight is going to be pulled down into the ground. So as you strike the ground, there's a lot more load into the lower extremity, right? So we want to limit this vertical oscillation. Simply by getting the legs to turn over more quickly, we increase the cadence, we can reduce that amount of vertical displacement and get the body moving more efficiently horizontally, right? That's a big goal here, to limit the amount of vertical to improve more moving horizontal. All right, so now next one here, one of my favorite people we're going to look at. When I first met her, this is during COVID, so this is an outdoor running analysis. I had her husband record her running. Since luckily we've been able to get back into the facility and everything to look at her in person, and she's seen some really good results. But look at the degree of crossover. So you can see as she strikes there, her legs, if you look at from her hips down to her feet, we have this angle of those feet really crossing underneath the body. And you can see that degree of crossover as she goes. You can also notice the knee brace, right? Wearing a knee brace on her right leg has a history of knee osteoarthritis, which is very, again, moderate case of that. So it really affects her a lot of the time. So we were looking for strategies that would take some stress off the knee joints, allow her to run more efficiently, so she can train for, and she's actually training for a full marathon this fall, right? So since then, working on increasing cadence, getting the legs to turn over more quickly, increasing hip strength, pelvic control, all these different things to adopt a slightly wider step width, because we don't want her running on that line. It's going to stress the knee joint a whole lot. And again, has seen a lot of success here over the last 6 months or so. So cadence alone, you can see whether it's overstriding, vertical displacement, or crossing over. Cadence really translates to and clears up a lot of little things that we see in terms of a faulty running form. Again, not all of these matter for every person. I think it's important to understand that. It really depends on your goals and your injury history, right? If I saw a person, which I commonly see, with no knee pain and they're crossing over, does that necessarily mean we need to fix that? No, they might be just more tolerant to that position. Doesn't mean they're going to get injured if we see some of these things, but we really need to tie it to their goals and then figure out what small tweaks we can make to hopefully offset that risk of injury in the future, which some things we'll deal with, other things we probably leave alone and try to address those low-hanging fruits. But really depends on your needs as a runner. Now, let's take a second to talk about Darlene. Darlene's another one of my favorite people. And I often say that about a lot of my running clients because they're such awesome people. I met Darlene back in October 2019. She was just cleared from physical therapy because she had bilateral hip pain. And lateral hip pain, they diagnosed it as bilateral hip inflammation. But she was trying to get back on track and get back into running. And had a lot of big goals, right? She wanted to do a half marathon, ultra, and now she's really has done great since then. One thing we noticed with her running, she was overstriding, and as she was on the ground and absorbing that force, she really didn't do a good job of mitigating the force, right? She was very stiff in her legs. So as she struck the ground, she was overstriding and more force into the lower body. And she wasn't bending into the ankle, knee, and hip well enough to distribute that force through some of the muscles and the soft tissue. And it was going almost get directly into her joint. So she was experiencing some lower back pain, lower back tightness, some residual hip pain, even coming off of physical therapy. So what we did was work on getting her cadence up specifically. Now she runs somewhere in the low 180s. Again, it's like 182 to 184. Legs turn over more quickly. Hips feel great. No lower back problems. And she feels overall like it's just improved her efficiency as a runner. So Darlene said, I asked her for a quote, hey, what do you think about cadence? How has it impacted you? Without cueing her, I wanted to see what she said. She said, increasing my cadence helped to reduce the hard foot strike I had for so many years. It reduced lower back tightness and pain and allowed me to achieve better running times without risk of overstriding, right? So something that has really positively helped her. It's as simple as her just achieving more steps per minute, right? A very simple change, but often goes often goes a long way when applied the right way. Now, when it comes to running economy is looking at the efficiency and the energy required to run. So goal when you're more economical is to require less energy at a given aerobic intensity. So say you're running a half marathon and you're typically a 10-minute mile pace. Our goal as we improve running economy, improve efficiency, is to require less energy, less oxygen at that specific pace. So you have more in the tank to potentially run faster, right? That's what we're looking at with running economy. Different factors that improve running economy. And I think you'll notice, again, pretty interesting here. These are a lot of the things we just talked about when it comes to running mechanics, right? How to optimize running mechanics. Stride length, vertical displacement, braking impulse. Those are kind of specifically what we covered a second ago. So if we can improve those and improve running mechanics with those, we can overall improve running economy, okay? And then ground contact time and tendon stiffness. So what this means here, ground contact time and tendon stiffness, we know as we increase cadence, we're increasing the amount of stiffness in the what's called the musculotendinous unit, the muscle and the tendon, how that attaches to bone. If we're increasing our stiffness there, our body is better able to absorb and release energy, right? So if our body is automatically doing that without us requiring oxygen and energy to facilitate that process, we can then run at faster. We're not using as much energy, so we can run at faster speeds without depleting or getting tired more readily, right? So if we look at this next slide here, you'll see how we have these two women on a pogo stick, right? That's exactly what we're looking at when it comes to running economy. We want to almost function like a pogo stick. We want in the first half of our running cycle, as we strike the ground and get to that early mid stance, we want our body to properly absorb energy. So as we get to that second half where the foot's under the body to fully pushing off, to release energy. It's this very efficient process we're looking to create to use our muscles, our tendons, to use these structures that are allowed to, or that do store and release energy, to work as efficiently as possible. If we're landing too far in front of the body, we're creating that braking impulse. We're slowing down a horizontal momentum. We're not going to be able to absorb energy as well because we're going to be overloading the system. If we're going up too high and there's too much force coming down, that's another way we're going to create a braking impulse and overload the system. So we want to run in a proper way so we can properly absorb and release energy. This alone will allow you to feel like you have more energy. There's more gas in the tank later in your runs if you can preserve that and allow your body to create that more naturally. So tendon stiffness, propulsion, proper running mechanics, these are the things that really tie into that. Now, from an injury standpoint, in looking at cadence specifically, a lot of research has been done over the years to look at the relationship between cadence and the amount of load being absorbed into the lower extremity. We know that if you're, again, key thing here to think about, I'm going to say a few more times, is when we're talking about increasing cadence, your pace remains relatively the same. We don't want to increase our cadence and run faster. Again, from a speed standpoint, we want to do that, but cadence needs to continue to increase as speed increases. But we know that if we're taking more steps per minute, we'll say you're running at 160 steps per minute, and we can, over that same minute at that same pace, run 168 steps per minute. Again, we didn't increase our speed. We're just striking the ground a little bit more often. We can disperse the amount of load that we're experiencing over more foot strikes. So why this matters is because the magnitude of load every time you strike the ground is less. In the end, we're still covering the same distance. We're still experiencing the same overall load, but we're not loading as hard every single time. That little bit has been found to reduce the risk of developing bone stress injuries and other overuse running related injuries, right? So that's huge. If we just strike the ground more often over a minute time, we disperse the load, there's less force going into some of these sensitized tissues that are experiencing pain, and we can either, again, get past an injury more quickly, or we can reduce our likelihood of injury because we're not overloading these tissues, right? It's huge. So what we know through the research is, as cadence increases, we can, and if we increase cadence by 5%, we'll say, again, the normal example is 160 steps per minute. If you're at 160 and you're increasing to 168, 5% increase, you can reduce the overstriding, reduce the braking impulse, and the vertical oscillation. All of those areas that we talked about before, we need to improve from a running mechanics standpoint, and then also from a running economy standpoint. It really ties into both of those. If we increase cadence by 10%, so 160 to 176, again, bigger jump there. And I definitely recommend, if we're going to do it, we're taking it slowly, going from 160 to 165, 165 to 170, 170 to 175. We're taking that in steps as opposed to just jumping right into that faster cadence. But a 10% increase in cadence can shorten your ground contact times. We know as we shorten our ground contact times, the tendon stiffness increases and we improve running economy, and it reduces the amount of peak ground reaction forces. So the amount of force being transmitted into the ground that's equal and opposite up into the leg. So anywhere from 5 to 10% is a general recommendation to increase cadence. Where should you be? It's hard to say specifically based on your running mechanics. Like I mentioned before, I have people that are at 145 that we don't touch because they're running in a very efficient way. I have people that are at 175, 180, and we're still trying to increase them. So it's really situation dependent. Now, pretty good quote down here from that research article. Although several injury risk factors have been suggested, the inability to adequately control the loads applied during initial stance is often identified in the focus of injury prevention strategies. So what that means is, from an injury prevention or a injury rehabilitation or recovery standpoint, we want to be better at absorbing loads in that first half of our running as we strike the ground and we get into early mid stance, because that's when the majority of loads are quickly being applied to the system. So that's preventing your overstriding, reducing your vertical oscillation, and trying to reduce that braking impulse that's going to slow down your horizontal momentum, right? So it's that first half that we usually run into trouble when it comes to running related injuries. That's why cadence, which we know directly impacts those things, is huge from an injury prevention standpoint. Now, Specifically, if we look at certain areas of the body, we're going to see how cadence impacts that. I know we had a couple questions here of people with different areas of injury from the knee, the hip, the foot, the plantar fascia. But when it comes to the foot and ankle specifically, if you increase your cadence by 5%, it reduces the amount of load on that plantar surface of the foot, so the plantar fascia and some of those smaller intrinsic muscles, by anywhere from about 3 to 8%, right? So we can offload some of the stress of those areas just by getting the legs to turn over more quickly. A 5% increase in cadence reduces the stress on the Achilles tendon, right? Achilles tendinopathy is a very common running related injury. So we can take some stress off that Achilles tendon by getting the legs to turn over more quickly. The knee, the research on the knee is just staggering. Majority of runners, I have so many runners right now with a past history of knee pain, and we're using cadence like crazy. We're really looking at running form. We're adjusting it. We're finding out where do they need to be for that foot to land in the right position, because overstriding really loads into the knee joint. A 5% increase in cadence reduces the amount of load absorbed at the knee by 20%. So just going from 160 to 168, you're reducing the amount of energy in load into that knee 20%, which is huge, right? Now, if we increase the cadence by 10%, you reduce the amount of load into the knee by 34%. So these are huge numbers. At the foot, it was only 3 to 8%, but at the knee, 20 to 24%. That's drastic. How many people do we know with patellofemoral pain, patellar tendinopathy, knee arthritis, right? IT band syndrome, some of these things that are so common for runners. Just getting the cadence in the step rate to increase can really have a big impact on the knee specifically. Now at the hip, increasing the cadence means we're requiring less range of motion at the hip, because in that period of time we're stepping more per minute, right? There's more foot strikes. So it's limiting our range of motion a little bit, which also limits the amount of crossover we have. So it allows us to run a little bit wider to improve overall alignment and stability of the limb. And then it showed that increasing cadence at the hip, we need to increase a little bit more to see those benefits. 10% resulted in less energy absorbed at the hip, right? So a little easier at the foot and the knee, a little harder at the hip, requires a bigger increase in cadence. Now, next up here, I just want to talk about Mary Lynn for a second. I actually had a check-in call with her today, and we're running through a brand new running analysis. It's one of my clients actually in Illinois, south of Chicago. But I've been working with Mary Lynn since August, so about 4 or 5 months or so here. When I first met her, she was experiencing left posterior hip pain and piriformis type pain. Pain while running was about a 6 out of 10. She was at the point where just getting really frustrated. Hard to build up your running and your mileage when you're consistently feeling 6 out of 10 pain, right? It's pretty moderate. I usually try to make sure when we're working with the client with the running related injuries, 3 out of 10 is really our cutoff, right? Once we get over 3 out of 10, which we're really changing something. We're reducing their mileage. We're adding more intervals in there, walking intervals, and we're really diving into fixing that problem. 6 out of 10 is a bit risky. What we noticed from her running was she had increased vertical displacement. Her running was very bouncy, coming up and down. Again, the more she goes up, the more body weight and load is coming down into that leg, and she was overstriding. So when we ran through an evaluation, which we did through a coaching app that I have and via Zoom, because it works pretty well like that, we can look at a lot of good things. We noticed that as she ran, you kind of see on this right side here, look at the position of her knee, right? And obviously this is her right side, but this is happening on both sides. As she was striking the ground, her knee was coming in, because she was losing stability at that lower extremity. So she was overstriding, landing with too much force out in front of the body, and her knee was collapsing in. So what that does is create a quick little torque or stress at the hip joint. And those hip rotators and piriformers really don't like that when you're landing and overloading those muscles, because they're trying to prevent the hip and the knee from rotating, but you're overloading by landing too far in front. So there's a lot of stress directly at that posterior hip. Now, again, we worked on increasing cadence. She loves the cadence. Some people, it's hard to adjust to using the metronome, hearing that beep as you run, and we'll look at that in a second. But for her specifically, she really loved dialing in the cadence because she felt like it made her run more efficiently. She reduced her overstriding, and her pain jumped down pretty quickly after just a matter of weeks. So she said, I'm going to read this a little bit long here. I had never given any thought to the relationship between cadence and my running, but after a few recurring flare-ups of hip and glute pain, I stumbled on the concept and Garrett's webinar as a possible remedy to my frustrating injuries. After working closely with Garrett to find my appropriate cadence, moving from the mid 160s to the low 170s, I quickly noticed an overall improvement in my running. The issues that had sidelined me on and off for months subsided within a few weeks. As documented in my running journal, which she documents everything. She has notes for me and everything every time we check in. It's pretty awesome. I went from a 5+ on the pain scale to less than 1 by week 6. I also noticed my runs were much, much smoother and more forward motion rather than up and down motion, which we talked about the vertical oscillation and running economy. Less impact, not as choppy, more comfortable, and most importantly, reduced pain. It's very interesting for me to see firsthand the connections amongst cadence, efficiency, and pain reduction. Plus, it's more fun because she's just one of those people that likes the cadence and the metronome. All right, so what I like to add into some of these webinars here are quick little quizzes, right? Nothing crazy. Won't be too tough on you, but just want to see how well you've been paying attention here over the last few minutes. So I'm just going to launch a quiz and see how well you're doing. I know some of you are signed on your cell phone, so I'm not sure if you'll be able to access that if you're doing it as a voice call, some on the computers or just cell phones viewing. So first question here, cadence is the number of steps you take per minute while running. Is that true or false? 2, increasing cadence has been shown to improve which of the following areas within your running? With your running mechanics, that overstriding, braking impulse, vertical oscillation, or all of the above. And then 3, adopting a faster cadence above your preferred cadence reduces the magnitude of loading during each foot strike. That's it. I almost have most of you filled this out already. Looks like you guys are doing pretty well. Perfect so far. Gonna wait another 15 seconds for a few other people to chime in here. Awesome. So just going to read through the answers here. Cadence is the number of steps you take per minute. That is true. Increasing cadence has been shown to improve all of those: overstriding, braking impulse, and vertical oscillation. And then 3, adopting a faster cadence above your preferred reduces the magnitude of load during each foot strike. That is true. So nice job, everyone. Now, as we get into calculating cadence, right, we know cadence can be helpful for various situations, from injuries, for improving running economy, improving running mechanics. How do we go about calculating cadence? 3 ways that I recommend. First, we can do this the old school way. We can do it manually, right? We can literally count the number of steps we take per minute, and I'll show you that in a second. Garmin's are huge these days, right? If you have a Garmin or some kind of endurance-based watch, it usually has that feature in there for some of the, again, as we start to get above some of those lower models. And then also what's called the Run Cadence app. This is an app that you can download on your smartphone, hold in your hand as you run for 60 seconds, and it tells you what your cadence or your step rate is. So a couple different ways depending on what you have access to. We have manually for free, Run Cadence app, which I believe is $5 to $10, or the Garmin, which you can spend anywhere from $100 to probably $600 or more with the Garmin watch. So I don't want to go over this too in depth, but if you have a Garmin, I definitely recommend taking a screenshot of this. These are 2 different ways to calculate your cadence with Garmin, whether it's immediately following your run and you're going into the settings to look at through your activities, look at a run specifically, and then identify the cadence. It usually gives you a max in an average cadence, or you can go into the Garmin Connect app. Using the app on your phone, you can go in there, go to activities, running, locate a conversational pace run. So I think that's important to realize here. When we're first starting out with cadence, we want to use conversational pace as much as possible, just because it's easier to understand. Majority of your runs should be conversational pace. We do add some speed work, some hill work in there, tempo runs, those things, but it becomes a little bit more difficult when we're looking at those faster paced runs. So start with your conversational run. If you're going out there on a Saturday long run, what pace would you self-select? That's what we want to really look for the cadence with. So looking and identify your cadence is very easy with the Garmin. Next up, the Run Cadence app. Again, very simple. Download this app, hold in your hand, warm up, walk for a few minutes, find your conversational pace. You click that learn or test feature, and all you do is run for 60 seconds on flat ground. It's going to tell you what your step rate is, because it's going to use that arm swing to determine how many steps per minute in that period of time. Pretty simple, pretty awesome app too, because you can also use that as a metronome if you're working on retraining, and it gives you that beep, 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 and then you're striking the ground to the beat. Last up, we have manual. So the old school way, usually, again, you can't go wrong doing it the simple way here. Start by warming up, fitness walking, some kind of dynamic warm up, 5 minutes or so. Run for 5 minutes to find your conversational pace, really dial in what you would run that nice, slow, long run at. And then simply you're going to count the number of left or right foot strikes over 30 seconds. Once you have that number, multiply it by 4. So for some of you, we might say here, it's 40 right foot strikes in 30 seconds. 40 times 4, 160 steps per minute, right? Always recommend doing these multiple times just to be as accurate as possible. But those are a few ways that you can calculate your cadence. And if you have any questions about that, feel free to drop a comment or a question in the Q&A there. Now, when we're looking at specifically manipulating your cadence, usually that means increasing your cadence majority of the time. There's not many instances where I had a runner reduce their cadence. So we're usually increasing. Sorry, dog just got out a toy there. If you hear some squeaking behind me, I always does this when I get on a webinar. But so first thing we can do is running retraining specifically with the metronome. I always recommend the treadmill for this. As much as the treadmill is pretty dreadful, right? The hamster wheel. It's awesome because we can select a speed. We can really, again, set the treadmill at that specific speed or pace, and we can use the metronome to increase our number of steps per minute. A lot of times I have runners that do cadence manipulation outdoors, and as they increase from say 160 to 168, they start running faster because there's nothing limiting their pace or keeping them in line. Of course, we can use the Garmin in some way to set restrictions on pace, which does help a lot, but using the metronome can be very valuable in this situation. So what you would do is download a metronome app. I usually recommend, again, if you have a more higher level Garmin, you can either hear a beep or a vibration with the Garmin. The Run Cadence app I talked about a second ago for checking your cadence, the Metro Timer app, or the Run Tempo app. So those 4 things are usually the most reliable here for using or manipulating cadence while you run. You're going to set your cadence for your desired number. So if you're at 160, we're going to say, okay, we're going to set it at 168. And then you're going to strike the ground as you hear the beep. One thing to realize, again, I'm going to say this, is pace remains constant as you manipulate cadence. We don't want to run faster. That's not an increase in cadence. That's an increase in speed, right? Keep your pace constant. Say you're running at a 6.0 on the treadmill. As you're at 160, you're going to run at 6.0 as you're at 168. That's the one thing that's important to realize that we see through the research that we need to do. Pace remains constant. So if we look at, hopefully you can hear me here. Sometimes as I play the sound, it tends to override my voice. But we're going to see, this is a friend and physical therapist that I worked with a lot when I lived down in Nashville a few years back. What he's doing here is he's running at a specific speed, his normal cadence, and he's going to increase. He's running at 165 here, and we're going to see him increase his cadence at the same speed. So just to give you kind of an example here. He's at 165. Sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit there, putting that 175 up there. But now you can listen. Ready? 165. He's actually going to stop. He's going to grab his phone, increase the metronome to 175 steps per minute. Notice he never touched the speed on the treadmill. Now he's running at a faster step rate. He went from 165 to 175. Speed remained the same. But you can see he starts to pull his stride in a little bit. He's not landing as far in front. His mechanics started to change there slightly just by increasing, in his case here, was 10 steps per minute, right? So that's how we would do it while running, using a metronome, setting and finding out where are we at, what's our starting point, what do we need to increase to, because we need to see how it affects our running mechanics, and then simply hearing that audible beep and increasing the number of steps per minute, right? So pretty simple, not easy all the time. Sometimes takes weeks or months to become comfortable with. In this situation, he went from 165 to 175. For someone new that's not familiar with this, I might start him at 165. We might go to 168, make that feel natural. 172, 175. It's a step-by-step process here. We don't need to rush and just all of a sudden increase. Doing it in a slow and progressive way is usually best, because we want this to end up becoming natural rather than being forced. Biggest thing to understand here with running retraining specifically. So as you use the metronome while running, you want to start slow, just like I said, to increase over time. Why? Is because if we increase cadence too quickly, it increases our rate of perceived exertion. It feels a lot harder to run. We don't want to self-sabotage our running just by increasing cadence from 160 to 180, right? That might make you really struggle through your runs. Another reason is we don't want to sensitize tissues. So we're starting to change how our body is striking the ground, our position, the amount of load into the lower body, what tissues are needing to absorb those forces. So if we all of a sudden go from 160 to 180, we might change our foot strike in a way that creates a plantar fascia issue or Achilles issue, or some other area of the body tends to get aggravated. We do this in a slow and gradual way, just like if you're planning to run a half marathon. We don't all of a sudden go from, if we were running 5 miles and just run 13, right? We go from 5 to 6 to 7, take a step back to 6. We build up in a very slow and progressive way. That's what I recommend with Cadence as well. So over time, use the metronome more often. So I would tell people, introduce this slowly. Introduce it first on some of your slow runs, on your short runs especially. If you're going out there and you say, hey, I have pain, and I said, okay, we want to increase your cadence from 160 to 168. I don't want you to automatically put that in the long run if you're running, again, 10 plus miles. I want you to do that on your runs that are maybe 3 or 4 miles a week. Do it on your shorter runs. Be more conservative in the beginning. We don't have to do it automatically every single time. Get familiar with it. But over time, I want this to allow the body to adapt to this and allow it to become more second nature, right? I want you to naturally then go into this cadence, because your body can just kind of go to it rather than having to use the metronome every single time, right? And the big thing to realize is you need to recheck running form periodically. It's not often that I tell someone just increase your cadence just because. We're always doing a running analysis first, because we want to see what their running form looks like. We want to see how their running form changes as we increase cadence, to understand how little or how far we want to go with that, right? And then always remember, pace remains constant. So if you're running a 10-minute mile pace, your cadence is 160, and we say you need increased cadence, you're still running a 10-minute mile pace as your cadence is 168. More foot strikes, but going the same exact speed, right? Our legs are turning over more quickly. Now, some drills that we can do in a controlled environment. What I find for some people is it's hard to all of a sudden go and increase your cadence as you run. That's the hardest way, right? That's one of the faster forms of our training of speed that we see on a weekly basis as we run. So doing different things like marching and skipping drills are so helpful, because we can use the timing and the coordination and the rhythm of the metronome to work on cadence and foot strike and positioning of the body in a controlled environment. So on this left side here, we're going to look at in place marching. I'm going to let this play for a second just so you can see this. So this is 30 beats per minute. I'm standing in place. I'm striking the ground directly underneath the body. I'm trying to time out to the beat, right? I'm trying to strike the ground as soon as I hear that beat. Good arm swing, good position, core engaged, shoulders relaxed, arms pumping in our proper position. Now we're going 60. And you'll notice that as I increase the number of the metronome, the number of steps per minute, my stride, or the range of motion that I'm going through, starts to reduce, right? And that's how we pull the stride, and that's how we reduce that vertical oscillation motion. And let's let this play through here to see. This is 60. Now 90, you can see nice quick motion. Position remains the same, tall, core engaged. You can see I just corrected here a little bit. Nice quick turnover of the legs, right? 90 beats per minute. Now on this other side, if we look at these in-place skipping variations, so what's called the pop and float, which is what I call it, which is pretty much in-place skipping, right? Now, as we get to skipping, at a certain point with the metronome, when we start to get 90, 100, 105 steps per minute, it's really fast to maintain that slow motion, that more marching in place movement. At a certain point, we need to go to skipping. It's faster, and now we start to get off the ground a little bit more. So you can see here, 90 steps per minute with an pop and float. A little bit slow for a skip. It's still a good starting point for a lot of people. That's easy to absorb. Now I believe we go 105 or 120 on this next one. Nice and quick. Quick turnover, right? We're trying to time and coordinate that foot strike. So as we strike the ground, foot's landing directly under the body. I'm hitting the ground directly at the beat. And the last one, let's see how well I keep up here. 150. Notice the range of motion, very limited, right? That's what happens with cadence, right? It's going to limit our range of motion. So I have some people that have very poor flexibility. We use an increase in cadence because it requires less range of motion. The stride's not as long. It starts to pull in that stride a little bit. So hopefully we're not leaning as far in front, but we're still driving and pushing off from behind to really propel ourselves forward. So that's in place marching and pop and float. Next one here, I'm not going to show you this entire video. It gets a little bit boring after a while, but this is my buddy Chris Wolf again doing slow motion marching. He's actually moving forward on this one with this marching tool. All posture, core engaged, good running form. Striking down and try and make sure his foot's not reaching in front. His foot's striking down under the knee or underneath the body. And you're forcing a good foot strike. This right here is 30 steps per minute. And the thing with this, I'm not going to show you all these because we start cranking it up all the way to 105, 120, 135. Watch how this changes. You can see as we work on these marching drills at a faster speed, what it requires. Nice quick turnover. He's not holding and balancing. He's going from one to the next. You can see how fast he goes here, right? This is getting up. I think this is the 135 right here. Very quick. This will get you out of breath. But that's what we need to do, right? We don't always just say, oh, here, we're going to improve running form by working on our running form. We're going to improve running form and cadence and proper mechanics by practicing some of these drills in a controlled environment. It's very hard to improve running form while running, right? It's fast. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of moving parts. So doing some drills like this, in-place marching, slow motion marching, pop and float, those could be good additions to your program. Now, I want to run through one last quiz here. We're going to get to the raffle in a second, let you guys enter your name into the raffle if you're interested in 1 month in the Healthy Running Program, like I mentioned at the beginning. So let's jump into this quiz. I clicked the wrong button here. Last one for tonight, I promise. Now, all right, a couple questions here. When first calculating your cadence, you should be moving at what speed? Walking, conversational pace running, sprinting, or all the above? When first calculating cadence, right? 2, a metronome is commonly used for running retraining and when manipulating cadence during marching drills. Is that true or false? 3, 180 steps per minute is the recommended cadence for every runner. Is that true or false? Okay, take a second, answer those. We're going to wait another 15 seconds, get a few more people to answer here. And we're going to kind of move on here. I don't want to take up too much of your time on this Tuesday. Still losing track of days here. All right, awesome. Let's end the poll here. So great job on the quiz. Calculating cadence, you want to be running at a conversational pace. 2, a metronome is used for running retraining and when manipulating cadence during marching. That is true. 180 steps per minute is recommended for every runner. That is false. So good job, everyone. Now, take-home recommendations. Where do you go from here? I always tell everyone, best thing you can do is win the raffle, right? 1 free month. We'll look at all this stuff as you go through. We'll look at your running form. Doesn't matter where you live. Do we do it remotely? We do it in person. And beauty of the Healthy Running Program in technology these days. It's so easy to work with people regardless of location. So win the raffle and we'll figure all this stuff out together. Next thing, to improve running mechanics or economy, you need to complete a slow motion running analysis, right? You need to understand what does your running form look like. A lot of people just arbitrarily want to say, oh yeah, I need to increase my cadence, but why? What does it look like? What are we trying to get to? What is that end goal? So you understand what you look like in terms of running form. Individualized to your needs and goals. Like I mentioned, again, what are your goals as a runner? It might not match. You might not need to increase cadence. You might need to based on an injury history or a speed goal, right? There are different things based on goals here. Start slow when introducing cadence. We don't want to sensitize any tissues in the process. We want to do so in a slow and progressive, gradual way that we're slowly starting to change running form, teach these tissues to absorb more force, or land in a different way, not bounce as much. We're going to load different tissues if we're changing our form with cadence. So do so slowly. So what I want to recommend to you guys is, and that's something I like to offer after these webinars, I've been doing the last couple of webinars and seems to really help people, is if you have questions specifically as it relates to cadence, let's jump on a call. I call these a customization call. A lot of people look at this content, and obviously I'm not telling you here what your cadence should be. That's one blank I'm adding into this webinar today, just because I don't know, right? I don't know where you're at, where you're starting from, where you're trying to get to, what your goals are, your injury history. So I try to make sure that I'm not giving a blanket statement to everyone, because if we look at the research, we just can't do that. That's not going to help you. You need to understand where you are and where you want to go and fill in that gap. So I like to offer a free 30-minute customization call. And you can see the link right there. go to that link, go to that site, schedule the call. I'm actually going to shoot you a text right here in a minute or so. My schedule is about 6:50 and hopefully would correspond with this slide. Schedule a 30-minute call. Let's figure out what you need specifically moving forward, because we can really dive into the details so I can better understand your situation. Let me know what you're working towards, and we can hopefully create you some kind of plan. If it's something you need that's more extensive, I'm happy to tell you about the healthy running program. But if it's a few suggestions that I can give that will improve your running, I'm happy to do that. Now let's what everyone's waiting for here. Let's enter names into the raffle to win one free month in the healthy running program. Kind of like what I mentioned just earlier and throughout the webinar, the healthy running program, we always look at running forms to do a running analysis. Whether you have access to a treadmill or you're doing that outdoors does not matter. We're going to identify your weak links. So through that running analysis and a movement evaluation, let's understand what you need specifically, what needs to improve, where you're breaking down. And then based on that, I'm going to help with you, and together, this is very collaborative. We're going to create you a 1-month running retraining, strength training, injury prevention program. So specific to your needs. Do you have access to a gym? Are you doing this at home? Do you have weight? Is this body weight? Everything is 100% tailored to your needs around your work schedule, your family life, your running. What's your mileage? What days do we need to put these on? What days do we need to work on recovery? And we're going to take into consider everything for you specifically. So what I'm going to do here is put up a poll one more time. It's the same quiz you guys have been looking at a couple times here. If you're interested in entering the raffle, all you need to do is let me know right here. So do you want to enter the raffle for 1 free month in the healthy running program? Yes or no? Very simple. I only enter those that want to be entered and that make it this far on the webinars. If you're not interested in it, no hard feelings. You're still welcome to reach out with questions. If there's anything you want to talk about. So we're going to wait another 15 seconds or so, get a few more people to enter in or make their decision. And if by chance, if you're hearing this right now and you are accessing this and cannot see the polls, that has been a problem in the past. If you're on your cell phone, you're listening in or kind of watching the webinar in some other way, do me a favor, shoot me a text. I texted you a little while ago to let you know that the webinar was coming up in 30 minutes. Text me if you're interested in entering the raffle. If you do not see this poll right now, I'd hate for you to miss out just because some kind of technology glitch. All right, guys, all entered here. I'm going to end that poll. Just for those of you on the webinar today, obviously we can only have one winner with the raffle. Usually the 1 month in the healthy running program, is my trial program here, is $199. So if you are interested, you do not win the raffle, I am offering a $50 discount on the 1 month in the healthy running program, this running remastered program for $149.99. So just keep that in mind if you don't win the raffle and you're still like, hey, how can you help me moving forward? It's a very good starting program for most people. Now, like I mentioned a second ago, make sure you schedule your customization call. Hopefully you guys received a text not too long ago with the link in there. Go click the link, schedule that call right now. Make sure you do that. I have limited spots just because obviously I need to take care of my clients and a lot of people getting started January goals, getting ready for April races and things, virtual races, or some places still doing it in person, but schedule that call. Make sure you don't miss that because there's a lot of valuable information that we can kind of discuss in person to help individualize this content 100% for you. All right, guys. So I appreciate you taking the time to join the webinar this Tuesday evening. Please remember, I will be sending out a replay of the webinar if you want to reflect back on this information. You want to send it to a friend, whatever. And I'll also be announcing the winner of the raffle in that email. This will come tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So I know some central people on here, 10 a.m. your time or 11 a.m. Eastern. Make sure you don't miss that. Check your spam folder, 11:05 or 10:05 if you're central. If you're the lucky raffle winner, respond back, say, hey, let's do it, right? I'm gonna make sure tonight I go through the names of those who entered the raffle, and I'm going to select. I usually do a random number generator and select, okay, number 7, and go down. Okay, number 7 is this person, and I pull that name. I also will send, again, you received a text a minute ago. In the email, I'll send the link for the customization call. Make sure you book that soon. Those spots will fill up. And then lastly, like I said a few times here, look in your spam folder. A lot of times the email, which will come from my MailChimp account, which is my newsletter software, will end up in the spam folder, promotions folder, what have you. Make sure you check that so you don't miss anything. and you're welcome to reach out directly. If again, you don't receive this, you don't see it in there and you're searching for it, just reach out directly to me. Now, any questions as we wrap up here? As you hopefully input a question here, if there's anything specific you want me to answer, I'm going to go through some of the things that were asked during the sign up. So Janelle asked how to keep injury free and possibly get faster. Again, Cadence can play a big role in that. Simply, again, increasing your steps per minute, reduce the amount of load into the lower body so we can hopefully offset the risk of injury. You can never 100% reduce your risk of injury with running. Unfortunately, again, a lot of people advertising injury prevention. In my opinion, we need to call it injury reduction because we can't prevent. 75% of runners get injured each and every year. With the injury rate so high, we need to do the best we can to reduce the severity of these injuries because they will happen. So really getting on top of that with understanding your running form, cadence, other corrections that we can put in there, but also making sure you're incorporating a strength training program on a regular basis, right? You're addressing your weak links, correcting those things, getting stronger, more resilient, improving stability. That with good running form is a good recipe for long-term success when it comes to running. Yvonne just mentioned run efficiently. So probably one of her goals is to improve running economy. So definitely understanding where that foot is landing. Are you striking too far in front? Are you too bouncy as your runner? Are you properly pushing off and extending throughout the hip? Do you have the stiffness in the muscle and the tendon? A lot of people, again, are so focused on improving flexibility because we think flexibility is going to make us better as we run. When in fact, again, having enough flexibility is important, but developing that stiffness so we can store and release energy, just like the pogo stick, right? That's what we want. We want to have some kind of stiffness that translates to better running economy. But cadence can play a role in that. The shorter we're on the ground, the less time, the more stiffness we're creating between the muscle and the tendon to improve overall running economy. And then Lane says run without plantar fasciitis. So plantar fasciitis is obviously super common when it comes to runners. We need to, similar to what we talked about earlier with the Achilles, increasing your cadence. If you're a rear foot striker, you strike with the heel, you can reduce stress on the Achilles. You probably also reduce some stress into that plantar aspect. We saw about 3 to 8%. So that can create a big impact on plantar fasciitis specifically. Also, we need to look at running from a stability standpoint. What kind of shoes are you wearing? Are you stable as your foot is in contact with the ground? Are we overpronating, or are we going from a more lateral foot strike to neutral very quickly? That's really loading into that plantar surface of the foot and the plantar fascia, sorry. So there's a lot of things to look at when it comes to plantar fasciitis specifically. So making sure you're weighing all of your options. I think definitely with plantar fasciitis, getting evaluated, performing a running analysis, happy to help you with that. Because a lot of these things, if we don't deal with properly early on, the chance of a previous injury coming back and bugging you again down the road is very likely. So you really need to make sure you get on top of them to reduce this from being just a chronic thing that you deal with long term, right? So being proactive and dealing with these as early as possible. Yep. So like I mentioned, question here. Unfortunately, I can't tell you a recommendation in terms of cadence. It has to be individualized. I definitely recommend figuring out if you don't know your cadence, in some way calculate that, see where you're at. Feel free to send me a video over, right? We want to talk about this, schedule a customization call. Let's look at that specifically. But I really hesitate to say you should be at this. If you're at 160, hey, 168 could be great, or you might not need it, or it could be 176, right? We really don't know unless we look at and analyze running form, and then understand your injury history and your goals, right? All right, guys. So I want to wrap up here. We're right at time. I don't want to take too much of your time on a Tuesday evening. I really appreciate you spending some time here. Thanks, Yvonne. Thanks, everyone else. Thank you for jumping on the webinar this evening. Schedule that call. Let's find a time to talk over the next week or two. And I know cadence can play a big role in improving your running in some way. So thanks again, guys. I hope you have a great evening. And that's it. Have a great rest of your week. Thank you.